Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Breakthrough. Today I'm here with Mr. Danny Marino. He's well known as being a guitarist, lead guitarist, and founding member of the Canadian metal band The Agonist. Thanks a lot for joining me, Danny. It's great to speak with you.
Thanks for having me, Rob. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a while. We've had many mutual friends in the music community, and including some of your band members or former band members. Chris worked on some of my band's music videos back in the day, so it was cool getting to know him and your music by extension. So I'm really happy to speak to you today. So let's start with The Agonist. Almost 20 years, six albums, I believe, and the band decided to break up in 2023. But before we get into that, take me back to the beginning. Like, what was your experience with the band? What were some of the highs and lows, your biggest takeaways, and what's going to stick with you the most as you enter this next chapter of your life?
Well, that's a huge topic, but I'll do my best. The band started, I guess, like a lot of bands do start with just a couple of guys or guys and girl that decide to like, we want to play music together. Let's start a band in like very much garage band style, essentially I had never, the Agonist is my first real band. I never played in a band before that, so it's been my only you know real band that actually did shows and did something. And I was like a bedroom guitarist until I was like 19. Basically, I had got together with various people to try and get a band together and never really got gelled, or we never got enough members to like get a full band, etc. And so I would just be playing all the time in my room in my parents' house, and my brother was in bands in the city. My brother was pretty well known in like the Montreal metal scene. His band, 3 Mile Scream, was very like in the early 2000s, up and coming kind of thing. And I used to go to his shows sometimes and stuff like that. And there was other bands that would open for their band. And there was this band from the De Montagne area up north of Montreal that were like younger, like more closer to my age, and they broke up. And the good bassist and the drummer of that band put it out there to all the bands, like, "Hey, we still want to get a band together if you know anybody." And my brother's like, "Oh, my guitarist, and my brother is a guitarist, and he's looking for a drummer and a bass player." So it was pretty much that simple. It essentially went on like a blind date jam with these guys. We got a rental by the hour room in a building that ended up being a huge part of our life going forward. There's the Jam Space building downtown Montreal, across the street from the Bell Center where the Montreal Canadiens play.
Oh yeah.
And that building's no more. It's been torn down for condos. It's kind of heartbreaking for a lot of musicians. But yeah, that first jam, we jammed for 3 hours, and I came with a couple riffs already. And by the end of the jam, we had a song written, and we're like, cool. Like, I guess this is working out, And it was then another song and another song, and we're just like, I guess we need a singer, And then we found a singer. It was actually a male singer, our first singer before Elisa.
Hmm.
Did a couple shows like that, just like little tiny bar shows, opening for some of the metal bands in the city that we knew as friends. And then that singer decided he doesn't want to be in a band anymore, doesn't want to sing, period. It's not his life. So we went again on the search, and we heard Elise. We knew of Elise already because her band was also big in Montreal. And they were having a falling out, and she was out of that band. And I called her up, and that was it. And then from there, it's just been onward and upward. We kept grinding, kept playing shows as much as we could in the city, getting a record together. And then finally, when we recorded our first recording, we did a bunch of demos like in that Jam Space building, but professional recording. We ended up working with someone here named Christian Donaldson, who is now like a premier metal producer. Over the course of like when we started with him, he was kind of a nobody still in his garage with his computer, like recording. He just starting out really. And so we got lucky that we got him so early on, and he ended up being our producer for all our records, almost all our records. And that record, that recording made its way into Century Media's ears via Chris, because he was on Century Media through his band Cryptopsy that he had just joined. Like a lot of happenstance there of like he joined Cryptopsy halfway through recording our album, our first album. And he's like, oh, all of a sudden I have to go on tour in Europe. And his first time too ever doing. He was also just a Montreal musician, only played in bars in Montreal. So he got like thrown into like the pro musician world like this too. And then he was listening to our mixes on the bus, showed the Century Media guy. He's like, who is this? I love it. And just that kind of went from there. And like, I remember, I'll never forget this moment where it was 2 a.m. in my parent, or no, it was actually early morning. It was like, I had just got up and it was fairly early, and I went to the computer and I'm like there, like in my underwear basically. And it's like the summertime. And I have a message from Chris Donaldson, and it's on MSN Messenger. That's how much I'm like dating myself.
It's okay. I remember using that as well.
Yeah. And he's like, hey dude, he has a way of speaking where he's just like, hey dude, I think I got you a record deal. Like just like that. Like as a like, and I'm like, it's like 8 a.m. and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I went out like the night before with like Kels and Derek, or the drummer and bass player, and I was like, wait a minute, what slow down. What are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, I showed your stuff to Century Media. He's the vice president. He says he loves it. He wants to talk to you guys. So, and like it was just like, okay, like all right. Like we were kind of, I'd say we were a little lucky that like we didn't slug it out for very long. You know, we never did a DIY tour, let's say, like some
Hmm.
bands do, where we just went on tour ourselves with no record label, no nothing. You know, we had done a bunch of shows around Quebec and Ontario. We played as much as possible everywhere we could for like a couple of years, and then that was it. And then it just went from there. Once that deal went through, we started getting our first real tours, getting out there, and it was like very much thrown into the fire with no idea at all about what it is or anything. And we're all like between 20 and 22 years old. And there's also very little internet at this time, like very minimal. No smartphones, all flip phones, no phone service in the United States unless you wanted to pay like thousands of dollars for it. Like there was no apps for, like we used like at least there was GPS finally, but like physical, you buy a GPS, you put it
Hmm.
in your car. Like, you know, everything was just, yeah, flying by the seat of our pants. We quickly bought a van. We took the little advance that we got and got a used van that was like not even totally not even meant to be pulling a trailer. Like it did not have the engine to pull a trailer, but we just put a massive trailer on it anyway, and essentially drove that van into the ground over the course of like 3 years and killed it. Um, so I'll never forget that aspect for sure. The very first tour, because of the high levels of excitement and stress and everything, and just like what it was, being so green and so naive, and not having a lot of resources like people do today. Like if that happened to a 20-year-old today, he would watch all kinds of videos. He'd follow his heroes on social media who document for him like every step of their day. Like they already would know what to expect, basically.
That's a really interesting thing, and it shows how much things have changed in just a relatively short span of time. We're talking about, like, a couple of decades. And how much of that early success do you attribute to the time period that you guys were in at the time? Would that type of thing be possible today, or was it really just, right place and right time, in terms of like how the industry was back then?
I think it obviously, because of the Chris part of it, there's definitely some right place, right time situation there that happened. But at the same time, we were also ahead of the curve with that stuff, in that one of the reasons Century signed us is they like the material, they like the music, but of course, in any record label, music itself is not always enough, or usually isn't enough. They want to see some hype. They want to see a reason, like, oh, other people, kids are liking this band. There has to be some hype around it. And what we had going is literally like, I think it had only been a year, but a year prior to that, we joined MySpace, and like the first Facebook for bands, basically, right? And
Hmm.
it's like we ramped that up really fast. Like it went for like it didn't. We had way more followers and friends, or I don't even know what they were called, if they were friends or what, on that platform. But then than a band that is essentially a nobody, like a local band,
Hmm.
and so they saw that mixed with, oh, I like this music, and then look at this, oh wow, there's some hype around this band, like not just in the city of Montreal, but like from kids around the world. There's something going on there. So those things, I think, are the two reasons that we got the shot, basically, to go. At the same time, the shot we got, which I'm still totally grateful for, was exactly what most people think it is. It's a kind of record deal which you sign your soul over to this company
Uh,
because they know that you're nobody and you have nothing. So it's kind of take it or leave it. We went to a high end entertainment lawyer. I got through, I know people that know a lot of people in that industry. And so we got kind of entertainment lawyer that's doing stuff for major Canadian artists like Nickelback and all this. And he went to the plate with them and they didn't really budge. They were like, look, okay, we'll give you this little thing, this little concession, but generally, no, this is the deal. So take it or leave it, you know. So we took it. And it's like, I'm still grateful that we did, even though it was unfair because, like, almost all the bands that are coming up and don't have anything sign their first deal, it's usually quite unfair, right?
mhm.
But that's like your ticket in. Especially then, I'd say now there's a lot more power for an artist to basically say, well, I can build my brand and my following without a record label, right?
Yeah, and
If
a lot
I'm
of
go all in on social media, if I really want to make that my day in, day out, my life nonstop, you could generate your own money. You could do everything basically without necessarily needing a label. Or you build yourself up so much that way so that when the label does come, you have a much bigger bargaining chip now. You're already very established and have a big audience. So now when you go to the label, you're like, I want this and I want this. I
so
think that's the best way to do it. Like, because it's what people who say now, it's just like, you don't even need a record label and all this stuff. It's funny though, then how come 95% of bands still are on record labels, even those that are very successful?
yeah, I was gonna
It's
ask, like, so what is the role? How has the role of the record label evolved since then, if so much more power is in the hands of the creators and the artists today?
There's still a lot of administration to be done on like the distribution side, both digital and physical distribution. Then there's a lot of like behind the doors of like people who know people, and that's still a thing, right? People who know people shaking hands, making doing favors for each other. Hey, take my band, I'll take yours. Oh, can they open for Gojira on this tour? And all this kind of. So there's a lot of that. And then on a promotional sense, you know, they're going to do a lot of the legwork in terms of getting the right promotion for a record in all the different spaces like Spotify, Apple, blah, 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 all these things, right? But yes, it surely has diminished. Their role has diminished. They are not essential. They used to be essential. Like there's no way about it. Now they're not essential, but I'd say that they're still helpful, and the blend of DIY and label at the same time, hybrid, to me is the best scenario for any artist. So the goal would be for an artist today, build yourself up by yourself as much as possible so that you can go to the bargaining table with a lot of clout and get, make a partnership with the label, a more of a fair partnership, you know.
That makes
Because even
sense.
once you get the audience, it's like, yeah, okay, fine. You have 500,000 followers on Instagram. That's great. But it's hard to like structure and monetize that in a smart business way for someone who has no training in all of that, right? Whether you're going to hire a business manager or a label or artist manager, like something, usually if you work with people that have a lot of experience in how to generate money from your audience, that's going to be very helpful, I think. And you also, it's silly. I find it silly now today that artists have to spend so much time doing such things. It's so energy sucking and takes away from the whole value you have as an artist. If more of your day is spent worrying about your finances and taxes and promotion and social media numbers and placements and all this stuff, and like the labels before, like the old days, or maybe even not so old, but let's say in more mainstream music where they have a lot more money, right?
Hmm.
They say to like pop star X, they're like, okay, we'll handle everything. You be pop star. That's your job. Your job is to be you, create music and be cool. That's your job. That's what's going to generate interest on you. And we're going to handle the part of like the boring administration part
Right.
to maximize how much money you make. That's the way it should be, in my opinion. You know, the artist should have the time to literally dedicate his life to just being the artist, and then he will generate the best version of himself.
Yeah, that's a terrific point. I think artists have gotten used to probably wearing a lot more hats than they did in the past, just due to the nature of, like you said, the DIY style of becoming popular, and just the nature of how social media works. So that's really interesting.
I'd say what it does beneficially for them as people is that, like, well, what it will do is it teaches that artist a whole lot of life skills that he wouldn't have gotten, right? If he just said, like, I'm an artist and I'm just going to focus on this. So that maybe by the time he's 40, 50 years old, what if he doesn't want to do this anymore? Well, now he understands how the world works with finance and business and marketing. And it's like, obviously, that's help. Like, I went through that too. That's where I'm at now, where it's like, because of all that stuff, because I was forced, because we didn't have enough financial backing to wear all the hats, I now know a lot of things about running a business, finances, taxes, uh, logistics of like planning a tour routing, travel, lots of stuff about air travel and all these things that I wouldn't have known, and marketing in general, right?
Yeah.
So it's beneficial. It's not a bad thing. I just feel like it's unfortunate that it's hard. It's really hard today for an artist to dedicate himself to his craft. He's
Yeah.
forced to multitask his brain.
So going back to the first tour that you had begun speaking about, and how you mentioned that you guys were kind of thrown into the fire as a bunch of early 20s, uh just kind of flung into the tour life. What was that adjustment like, and what were some of the big challenges early on, when you guys got that first opportunity?
I'd say the thing is that we're lucky that we were as young as we were, and we were the type of people that we were. There's a bunch of people I know that did their first or second tours and they tapped out right away because it just didn't jive with the kind of person they are and what they value. So, and because the tour was like, okay, we're living in a van, literally living in it, no hotels, nothing. We had built some really makeshift wooden bunks in the back of it that are like, were really shoddy and frankly unsafe. Like they were chained to the ground. Um, and the van also, that van had no air conditioning, by the way.
All
No
right.
air conditioning. It had an air conditioner, it was broken.
Okay.
But we got the van for like $5,000. So, you know, um, so talking about driving through Texas it was in September,
Hmm.
right at the end of the summer with no AC. and like dying, and basically, and also like we were making, I think the pay on that tour was $250 a night. We would spend that easy in gas every day, like no problem, you
Wow.
know. Then there's the food and everything else, whatever else comes up, van breaking down, oil change, everything. So merch had to cover all that, right? And so essentially, it was totally living in a van, living in Walmart parking lots. Every chance we had to get food that was super cheap, we'd take it. We'd go in like a Walmart, let's say, instead of going to like restaurants every single day, right? We go in a Walmart and get like packages of like a loaf of bread and a package of cheese and a thing of peanut butter and a, like, you know what I mean, like staple survival food.
Hmm.
And usually the venue, when you tour in Europe, there's full catering. Everywhere you go, there's a massive full spread of catering, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and coffee, and everything, and every drink you can imagine available, and all this stuff. But in the US, they don't do that unless you're like an arena band. That's different.
Okay.
So usually what they'll do is a buyout, right? They'll just give you a little bit of cash. But at that time, since we were like a nobody band and we were just opening, it's like we got $10. So you got $10 a day to survive, basically. Um, and so yes, it was rough with that. If you're also like if you're living in a van and you don't have hotels, there's no showers,
Right.
right? So you have to get showers any chance you can. You can do gas station. There's some truck stop, like trucker gas stations that you pay for a shower kind of thing. But what ended up happening too is that we, especially in our younger life, you make road friends, and then you start sleeping at random people's houses, which is something maybe at close to 40 years old now I wouldn't do, right?
Yeah.
But that's what we did. That's how we survived. It was like there was no plan. It was just like we're in whatever, Austin, Texas. Random guy comes up to the merch table. You guys are awesome. I loved your set. Cool. What are you doing tonight after the show? You want to party, or like you going to a bar? What's happening? We're like, well, we don't really know yet, actually. Uh, we don't have a big drive, so we are probably going to stay in Austin somewhere. Like, well, you guys need a place to crash, and that's how it starts. And then we have to like decide: do we trust this person?
Right. The big question.
It's never happened. We stayed at a lot of people's houses, and we never had like an actual like oh shit moment of like this is dangerous or we're in trouble. But there's been like crazy things that have happened, but not in that way of like one of the guys was like, we had no idea. He's a really cool guy. He said, come back. I have this, like, I'm out in the country and I have a lot of space. And I also even have like this shed that I built. It's like my band, we built a jam room in it. And like, you guys want to like, have some beers and jam tomorrow or whatever, you could, and all this. And we're like, oh, okay, I guess. And then we went and we slept at the end of the night or whatever. And I woke up to the doors being busted in and like him walking through the door, him and his friend with like huge bushes of weed. And we didn't realize he grows weed. He's a weed dealer farmer, basically. And it's in Texas, which is highly illegal at the time. Right. And he's like, we got to cut all this. Their wind blew them over. And it's like, if I don't cut it now, we're going to lose all this stock. I'm like, I didn't even know you were like had a grow operation when I came here last night. Like, you know, that kind of stuff. But nothing bad happened. And we actually stayed friends with that guy for years.
Cool. Well, I mean, thank goodness nothing ever happened, but I understand. Yeah, it could be you're taking a risk every time you take somebody's kind offer up, because
Yeah.
you can never know what could happen. I'm interested in the difference between touring in Europe and touring in the States. I imagine the European tours came later after you guys had grown and developed a little bit more. But what's the big difference between the scenes between Europe and the US? And what was your experience like between the two?
Um, our experience for us was that we tended to prefer Europe in general, because for a few reasons. One, um, they treated the artists better. As I mentioned, it was more like the old way, I guess, in that sense. And so artists usually would, we've traveled in both tour buses and vans in Europe and stuff like that. It can happen, like, but more often than not, usually there was some sort of tour bus arrangement. So in terms of your comfort level and your just day to day, it's way better in Europe. But on the other side of it, it's not just about like my comfort or whatever, but like the actual shows themselves also. The European audiences tend to be a little bit more, at least to our genre of metal, a little bit more enthusiastic. You know, we tended to do a little better with European audiences, uh, much more into, like, they're less into, let's say, the tough guy metal.
Okay.
You know, like tough guy with metal would be essentially like Pantera. It was the ultimate tough guy band, you know, hate breed, this kind of a thing, right? That's very American, very taps into that sort of gasoline, you know, leather and chains and fights and, you
Hmm.
know, UFC. Like, we weren't that kind of metal band. You know, that's not our appeal, even though we could get extremely fast and extremely like death metal-y at times and all. It wasn't that. And that tends to be go over better in Europe in general than, so better audience reception, better treatment of the artists, better venues usually, as well. Like a lot more options of mid-sized venues. Like in the States, it's kind of like a lot more of like there's amazing giant arenas and giant theaters, and then there's a lot of little bars, but there's not a lot of good middle ground in every city for that mid-size band or package that we were usually a part of, right? That kind of like 700 capacity room sort of thing, you know.
Hmm.
um so I like that there was more, seemed like more availability of that. I think it's also because the governments in Europe like fund these kinds of things, right, to encourage the musical culture of the city. So they will help these mid-sized venues stay afloat, right, and have good sound equipment and all this stuff. So that's obviously better too.
Where's the coolest place that you guys ever played, in your opinion?
Probably Japan. I think, yeah, hard to it's hard to top that, I would say. But then there's also, we played in like Cusco in South America, like, which is basically just right near Machu Picchu, essentially. So we didn't get to go to Machu Picchu, but we were still like, I think the elevation there is something like, I don't remember, but very high, like 8,000 feet or something like that. We literally had to, like, I got like lightheaded. We had to, like, I was chewing like coca leaves because they told me that you should do that. It helps, you know. It like, for in our hotel, like there was stairs you had to go up to like the third floor, and I was going up the second row of stairs, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my god, you know, because that's what it is, the elevation sickness essentially. But it was so cool, yeah, to play there, and to they took us around to into the mountains to see, you know, everything and all that. So that was pretty awesome. The gig itself wasn't the greatest, but
What
the
was
experience was awesome. Whereas Japan, everything was awesome. The show was awesome. The experience was awesome. Everything was, you know, yeah.
what was the biggest highlight, I guess, for you personally over the course of the time in the band? Like an achievement or just a moment that really struck you as like, oh my God, this is the greatest.
I mean, the very first tour in a way was like that, just because I couldn't believe it was happening, kind of thing. Coming from, like, we literally never, I don't think we ever played what would be considered, what I would consider today, a professional show. Like, because it was always like a locally organized show versus one with like a big production team, and people on that production team have done thousands of shows, and everything's very, there's a structure and a plan, and everything's very on, you know, schedule, and lighting and pyro and like all this kind of, and it was like we were thrown into like a real tour, and it was like, it was, the band was called Sonata Arctica, which is like a Finnish power metal band, but they're quite popular at the time. And it was like you're playing to like 1,000 people a night, and it was like in these theaters, and there was a sound guy and a lighting engineer and a production manager and a stage manager and a tour manager and a this and a that, and everything was like, okay, go, we got to get this over here, let's go, guys, we got to, and we're just like these dumb kids who didn't know anything. We're like, okay, like, you know, so even just that first tour was a highlight in a way of like learning. But then another tour we did towards the end was in 2019 in Europe. We did a tour where we were direct support for Ginger in, and they're exploding basically. And it was like, yeah, just really, really successful shows every night, right? Playing big crowds and big venues. And we were direct support. So we were on at like 9 p.m., like in a really good slot, you know. So just, yeah, every night was a killer show instead of on tours, you have big nights and bad nights, right? But,
Hmm.
and we had like a tour bus and we had a crew working for us. You know, it was like really, everything was like pro. There was no bullshit. Like everything was done the right way or mostly the right way, you know. I never until that point I didn't experience, other than festivals, I didn't experience much of the whole like you just walk on stage and someone hands you your guitar and it's just like everything's ready, you know. So there'd always be a lot of element of DIY in that sense. So that was kind of, that was a nice, you know, feeling of like this is a real deal now, you know, this is not still clawing your way sort of thing.
What was the biggest challenge on the flip side that you can recall?
Probably biggest challenge was like maintaining physical personal relationships in the face of such extreme living circumstances. When you put people in very difficult extreme circumstances, as if like you have a couple and let's say they're living in a middle class way, right? Yeah, they're both making an income, you have a small house, you live up like that. Then all of a sudden you take them and you make them both unemployed and you make them force them to move into a small little really ugly apartment, and they're always there in the apartment together because they're both unemployed, and you're asking for fights to happen and challenges and relationships and all trying to like, so now you have five people and you put them in a band together, and it's like usually I'd say we were pretty good overall, but those spikes would definitely happen like they do with every band. And it's so hard because it's like you need, there's no escaping it unless you literally leave mid tour. You just walk off in the middle of a tour and fuck everybody over, the whole band and all the crew and everything. He's like just the whole promoters, the labels. So there's a lot of pressure to be like, well, you have to figure out a way to sort this out and live because it's not just you involved in this. So yeah, so I'd say that by being in such rough living circumstances, trying to keep the morale and teamwork and camaraderie of everybody at the same time, which was something that I had to work on a lot because I was, for most of the time of the band, it's kind of like all roads led to me. So whether it was the writing of the music, you know, or the management of the band or the finances, it's like people all had like different roles that would help out. Like the bassist of my band helped a lot with the finance management, but still, even though he was like had the bank account and like would like make the transactions, everything had to go through me. Every single decision about everything, he'd come to me and we'd talk about it, you
Hmm.
know. And then so it's like, so everything, every marketing plan that I was the main contact with all the record labels, all the booking agents, all the everything, it was all, everything went through me. And so then I had to dispense the information to everyone else. And then I had to deal with the HR issues basically of everyone whenever they would have them. So I had to like mediate. And then I was involved as well too in issues that would happen between people. Like I would, you know what I mean? And then so it's like, yeah, it's a lot like running a business and having a family at the same time.
Right. And then so that leads into your actual family, which, I know that you have a kid now. Congratulations on that. Um, how did that change things for you in your life? And I know that I've spoken to many musicians who, after having kids, decided to stop touring. It's got to be incredibly difficult to go on tour when you have a family. I can't even imagine how that must be. How did that play into things for you, and did it contribute to the decision to stop touring and kind of put a break on things? What happened there?
Yeah, but I mean, it was essentially the main factor, but there were other factors. A lot of things that I mentioned about the difficulties of touring were always there and always an issue, right? But I was willing to push through them essentially, regardless. But having my son, for sure, what happened was I had him, but I had him right in the peak of COVID, by the way. It was like
Hmm.
it was like when it was the highest. So that was obviously a huge stressful situation in general. But when it calmed down and we got back to active again in like 2021 or 2022, it was like I did one US tour with him at home. And then I did one European tour after that with him at home. And the first US tour was really hard for my wife at home, like man, like caring for him, but
Yeah.
for me being away and seeing him like grow so fast, because when they're that young, it's just like a month you can change a lot. 2 months, it's like a lot can happen.
Hmm.
Um, and so that hurt. But I still, after one tour, was like, well, we'll see. It's kind of like I'm gonna do this European tour and we're gonna see after that. But yeah, that was not good. And at the same time, the band was also like on a downward trajectory in what I was talking about like the personal relationships of everybody in the band.
Okay.
So it was like less fun to go on tour because of that too. So on top of it, I'm missing my son. We're not financially doing that great because the market is so hard, kind of thing, and a lot of other factors. It's not just, oh, I blame the market. It's like whatever, for whatever reason, our music, wasn't really catching on as much as I'd like it to, and everything. Uh, and on top of this, now I'm missing my son, and I'm going out to feel like half the time kind of miserable and half the time good, right? So then I went to do the European tour, and as I was doing it, I kind of like I knew pretty soon in to it that I'm like, I think this is the last one for me. Like, at least for sure, the last one for the foreseeable future. Like, maybe I know sometimes people, their kids get to be older and all of a sudden it's not really a thing anymore. I
Hmm.
don't know if that'll happen, but I told the band after the tour was over, I said officially, basically, to them, listen, this is where I'm at in my life. I can't go on tour like this anymore, the way it is. Um, I am still 100% open to the idea of you guys hire a live touring guitarist, and I still can write music for you guys if you want that. And I can still help manage the administration, because at this time too, I also handed off, I told them prior to that, like about a year prior to that, I said, also, because of the family life and everything else, I think it's best for the band if other people take on a lot of the admin for the band, because it's good for the band instead of me being there and being like half there, right? Someone who, and they liked that, and they were like, a couple members took the reins basically and said, we'll deal with it, we're going to do it, okay, great.
Hmm.
And then when I told them about the touring thing, they said yes, they agreed. They're like, no, we'd prefer that you still work for the band in a writing capacity and all that. And then, if you're willing to do that, then sure, that's what we're going to do. So that's where it was at. But then after that, over time, it started degrading further. The interpersonal relationships and interpersonal decision making, people disagreeing with like the direction of the band, and basically what it was, I think, is that some people, the main issue is that some people in the band felt like, and like rightfully so, that if we don't go all in on this, there's no point. Like, unless we're willing to dedicate our everything we've got, to this and say, like, we're putting all our cards in, like, they didn't want to half-ass it basically and be like a part-time sometimes band
Hmm.
kind of thing, which there are a lot of bands that are in that position. They're kind of like they've gotten older and they decide, well, we're going to tour less. We're going to tour when we decide to tour. We're going to, release albums when we decide to release albums, and it's more like, so everything's a little slower. And some people in the band weren't interested in that sort of vibe. They're like, we need everyone to be all in, or, it's like they want the best possible chance at success. And the best possible chance you're going to get is if you try the hardest that you can.
Yeah.
Right. So I agree with that. But at the same time, I knew for myself that I was like, look, the most I can give to this band is that I still love writing music, and I still do even to this day, but it's like, I can't do the touring part, and I'm willing to help with the administration, but not like I used to before, where it was my entire life. It was my, like, literally my whole life. It was like I had a day job, and I would go to the day job and I would just work on the band all day long. And they had no idea, you know? And it's like, but so, and it kind of all fell apart from there between the disagreements of the direction of the band, as well as the interpersonal relationships not being good anymore. People didn't feel like they were friends much anymore. It felt like a business that you had to, like, we'd have like a business meeting, like a Zoom meeting with everybody, because people are dispersed in the band, and some are in the States and whatever. And it's just like, it felt like a huge chore. No one wanted to be there. It just felt like a big stressful event to have this call to talk about the band business,
Hmm.
essentially. And so it wasn't a good vibe. And eventually it came to the point of just like, look, are we just gonna say fuck this? Because this is, and then we kind of agreed that it was the best path was to just let it die. There was talks about, like, well, we'll announce a hiatus, right? And then some people said no, like, I don't want to stay tied to this. If it's like I want it to be, I want to be completely, either we're doing this for real, or I want to be completely free of it, right? And I don't want, like, big questions looming, and like, is it gonna, when is that gonna, when are you guys gonna get back together? It's
Yeah.
just like clean cut off, or we do it. So fine, clean cut off then, I guess,
Hmm.
um and that's kind of what it was like. I'm happy to say, though, that actually what's happened is that the relationships between the people now is better. like like it took a few months to, like, just stop talking to each other kind of thing a bit, and just like, but now, like, literally I was with Chris, my bassist, last night, and
Hmm.
we're kind of like slowly rekindling our friendship, which is like really important to me. He was like literally my best friend. Like, it was like since we were 20 years old, like, it was me and him kind of thing since the beginning with the band. So I'm happy about that, like, it's not as if it's like bad terms, like we don't speak to each other, like some bands are like totally cut off like that.
Right. It's got to be bittersweet after you spend so many years with, like, working on something all together, and then to have to put an end to it. But as you said, the motivation was coming from a good place for you to be spending more time with your family. And I'm wondering, how has your life changed, or how has your outlook changed since stopping with the agonist, and how has having a kid kind of, I guess, changed your perspective on life?
Like, immensely, like more than anything has ever changed my perspective. I think a lot of events happen in a short amount of time that really were perspective changing for me. So it was just, and now I feel better now mentally than I ever have in my life, because I feel much more aware and in control and understand of like who I am as a person and objectively looking at myself and my life and scenarios. But like, okay, um, COVID happened. Then we had a baby
Mhm.
during it. So major crazy thing that had a lot of people thinking about their life and the world and all that, right? Then I had a baby in the middle of it. Then, um, um, sorry, recently also my mother died.
I'm sorry to hear
Okay.
that.
Yeah. So it's, and all of these things happen in like a span of like 3 years. And the band broke up in there as well. My entire life's work like basically came to an end in there as well. And all these things happening is like it just got me thinking a lot about like, who am I? What do I care about? What matters in the world to me? What all these things? What is life exactly? All this kind of stuff. So I started reading again. Like I was never much of a book reader. I've read some books in my life, but not a lot. But so I started reading in the past couple of years again, and a lot more like nonfiction kind of stuff. There's some like fiction novels or as well, but like a lot more of just like understanding the human brain, understanding philosophy, different philosophies of life, all that. It's really opened my eyes to. I also during the pandemic and having a child and having some like family issues and all that, I started doing some therapy too, which I'd never done in my life. I'd never officially talked to anyone. Again, that also opened my eyes a lot to things. And I felt like I was always driving a car like on a racetrack and like just looking at, okay, now I got to get around here. Now I got to get, and now what about this? And I'm like in the car, like tunnel vision, like this. And now what's doing with this? And now it's like a video game, and I have like the above view, like Grand Theft Auto looking from above, and I look
Right.
can see it from above, and I'm like, there I am. Okay, but there's the rest of the world. And so I can make calm, more rational decisions, and the way things come at me, not be so reactive to everything. You know what I mean? And take it in, try to understand it before I react. And it helps people around me. It helps my own, psychological state. But as for the my son part of it, it's like I never in my life experienced that kind of like joy. It's a unique thing that you never get from anything else. Like I thought like playing on stage to a big audience in Japan and killing it and having them cheer at the end was like the height, of
Mhm.
like feeling you can feel or whatever. And it's like, no, it's not even close kind of thing. So being with him and seeing him grow and raising him and all of that is, yeah, it's the best thing in my life, basically. And it's why I decided that I just like I can't go away multiple months a year every year during this period of his life.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I'm super happy to hear that, you know, you made that decision with peace of mind and that it's all working out for you. And I'm curious to know what's next. If you have any, you mentioned that you're still writing music. Do you have any future plans, or is there anything that you're working on currently,
Yeah,
musically?
I mean, I have a lot of material. Like it's kind of like sporadic that like it crosses different genres, but I write and record a lot here in my house. And I do have a sort of loose plan that I'm working on with someone else to like try and make it a reality and like kind of, and so there's a bunch of songs that are unfinished, and the hope is to collaborate with this person and finalize them essentially, and yeah, to put it out. And it would be one aspect. It would still be in the metal area for sure, but I have two or three other types of genres of music that I've been working with as well, and I don't really know what to do with them at this point, but they're there, and stuff just keeps coming out. It's just I can't help it. It's just that's what I do. That's the number one thing that I do with music is I make music basically, and I never, almost never sat down like I'm gonna learn this song that I love from front to back. Like I can't remember the last time that I did that, or I never was in a cover band. I never, it was just like I would learn little pieces and be like, oh, here, I like be noodling and I accidentally play something that sounds like a Led Zeppelin riff or something. And I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, that's that thing. Eh? And then I like quickly figure it out by ear and be like, yeah, yeah, that's how it goes. That's Heartbreaker. And then I just kind of stop. I'm like, that's the riff. And I'm like, I'm not interested in learning the whole song and like trying to play the whole song. It's like, I just want to go back to making stuff up. So that's just kind of always what I do when I play music is just randomly improvise until something clicks.
What are your, we didn't really touch upon the actual music aspect, but who are your biggest influences as a guitar player?
It's like it totally varies. I think that I don't have like really set. I think maybe in my lifetime there was, early on, like I was raised on a lot of like classic rock and stuff like that. So Jimi Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan and these kind of guys were definitely, and even like my uncle Frank Marino, it's like they were all in that same vibe, right? And it's
Mhm.
like it was like my formative time. So I would have, if you asked me then, I would have said them kind of thing. But now I don't really have like guitar heroes per se. I have a lot of different artists that I really appreciate what they're doing, like I'm into a lot of progressive rock now, bands like Leprous or another one called Pineapple Thief that I like. It's kind of moody progressive rock stuff, but then I like listening to new stuff as well. Like I always go on like my Spotify or whatever, and I go to like Discover Weekly or places like that to just see if something can hit me and I've never heard of it before, and I try to discover new things. Other than that, I'd say my biggest thing that I've gotten really into in the past few years is movie soundtracks. And so, like, I'm a massive Hans Zimmer fan, and I'm going to see him live in the Bell Center for the first time this year. But yeah, I've been getting a lot into that, into the soundtracks and ambient music and stuff like that.
Cool. What is it that drove you towards the metal genre? You mentioned having a lot of classic rock influences, but what thrust you kind of in the metal direction when you were starting out in bands? Was it just the people that you were playing with, or was it a conscious thing that you wanted to do?
I think it was the energy of it and the speed. Like if you listen to the Agonist too, it's like it's often quite fast and quite energetic throughout. And I have a hard time writing groovy music. I really do. It just doesn't come naturally to me. There's been some over the years it has happened, but what usually like sparks, with me right away is when something has like a high energy level. It has that the speed and intensity and it like jumps from one place to another quickly. So it keeps that energy up. So, you know, that's always just, I can't shake that part. I think I've been, even the stuff that I'm writing now that is not metal often still has a pretty high energy level to it.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear some of the stuff that you're creating whenever it gets released. Um, Congratulations again on the family. And yeah, I just wish you all the best. And thanks first and foremost for taking time to speak with me because it's been a while since we caught up, and it's always great to speak with you. So really appreciate that.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm glad your podcast is working out and you seem to be doing a lot of them lately. And it's cool to see.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I love speaking to music people too. So this was a real pleasure.
Awesome. All right.
Cool.
Thanks a
Well,
lot.
take care, Danny. We'll speak again soon.